Chapter 1: The Rebirth of Aristotle. They did not begin with celebration. For too many years, the Institute had imagined this moment in forms that now seemed childish. The triumphant unveiling, the stunned silence, the first ceremonial sentence crafted to survive history. But when the chamber finally opened, none of those rehearsed possibilities remained. There was only the soft mechanical release of the seal, the downward drift of cold vapor, the change in air pressure, and the unbearable fact that a human being might step out of an extinction 2,000 years old. The sealed revival chamber occupied the center of a larger white room. When its hatch released, vapor spilled across a floor that, for the first moments, held only the low platform and the man on it, no other person inside with him. Light came from nowhere he could immediately understand. No flame, no aperture in the ceiling, no visible lamp. The illumination seemed simply to exist, pouring down evenly over walls so seamless they resisted the eye. Along one long side of that room ran a gallery, separated from him by thick, laminated glass. On the far side, it was a window for those who watched. On his side, it returned only a shallow gleam, withholding faces so the opening instants would not confront him with a wall of strangers. There stood the physicians, linguists, historians, systems engineers, legal observers, 2 security staff who had been instructed above all not to look like guards, and the small core group who had argued for years over whether this act could ever be justified. Among them, unhurried in manner and plainly not there to conduct an experiment, was Hassan Akoy, the Institute's ethics liaison, whose brief was to keep rights from collapsing into the language of property. Now that it had occurred, none of them looked justified. They looked frightened, reverent, and intensely responsible. The man inside moved. Not dramatically, not like a figure from myth or spectacle. He drew breath first, sharply, as one pulled upward through deep water. Then his eyes opened against the light. His hands touched the low platform beneath him with cautious intelligence, not flailing but testing. When he sat upright, the motion carried strain in it, as though the body had returned before the world around it had acquired shape enough to receive it. He was older than some of the render models had predicted and less fragile than most of the ethicists had feared. The face was severe without harshness. The beard close, the eyes quick and dark under the shock of disorientation. There was no grandeur in him of the theatrical kind. What registered in the gallery, almost at once, was compression. Attention, discipline, and a mind already searching for causes before the body had fully steadied. No one spoke. That silence, too, had been debated in advance. Would silence be gentler? Would speech be kinder? Would immediate explanation reduce terror or deepen it? None of the arguments mattered now. The man on the platform was looking at the room itself, empty of every other human form, and what he saw must already have been sufficient violence. He looked first at the ceiling, though there was nothing to see there but smooth light, then at the walls, then toward the long glass, which from his side would not resolve into anyone watching. He turned his head toward the equipment armature partially recessed into the chamber wall, and his expression changed not into fear, but into offended attention, as though the world had committed a conceptual mistake before he had been given the chance to object to it properly. A door opened in the white room's perimeter, not through that glass, but where a short passage joined the gallery to the room itself, and Dr. Eleni Markatos entered alone. The panel sealed behind her before she had crossed half the distance to the platform. She had been chosen less because she led the project than because, among the team, she could speak reconstructed classical Greek with the least visible strain. Even so, she felt with every step across the open floor the humiliating inadequacy of all preparation. She kept her hands open and empty. No tablet, no interface. Nothing that would suggest either authority or threat. When she spoke slowly and in the old language.
Aristotle, son of Nicomachus, do not be afraid. You are among human beings.
His attention moved to her, with an immediacy so intense that several people in the gallery straightened involuntarily. He studied her face first, then her clothing, then the room again, then her face once more.
Among human beings,
He repeated. His voice was rough from disuse, but not weak. The Greek was living Greek, not text recovered from dead signs. That alone almost undid the linguists behind the glass.
Then I am not in Hades,
No,
Eleni said.
nor among gods.
no.
He looked again toward the walls and the cold light.
That answer
He said.
requires a stronger companion.
The line struck the room with a force no one had prepared for. Not because it was witty, though it was, and not because it proved his identity in any vulgar sense, but because it revealed his first instinct so clearly. Not lamentation, not supplication, not wonder ungoverned, a demand for explanatory proportion. Eleni inclined her head slightly.
Yes,
She said.
it does.
He swung his legs slowly over the side of the platform and placed his feet on the floor. The motion cost him effort. The physicians tracked respiration, balance, pupil response, and microtremor from the instruments they had sworn would remain as unobtrusive as the technology allowed. Aristotle ignored them, or had not yet decided whether they deserved notice. He stood. One of the security staff in the gallery took half a step forward without meaning to. A faint scrape carried through the glass. Eleni heard it and willed the room not to become a cage at the first instant of its honesty. Aristotle steadied himself, then looked directly at Eleni.
Tell me first
He said.
whether I am deceived.
There it was, simple in the saying, absolute in what it asked. In the room it did not sound ceremonial. It sounded urgent, exact, and morally serious. He did not ask where he was. He did not ask who they were. He did not ask by what marvel the room had been made. He asked whether the ground of the encounter was false. Eleni answered with the care of someone stepping onto ice she had helped lay herself.
No, we are not trying to deceive you.
That is not the same as saying I am not deceived.
No,
She said.
it is not.
His eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility, but in recognition.
Good.
He said.
Then you separate honest intent from what has yet been shown.
They did not try to move him immediately. A stool was brought, plain and made of wood, because the designers had long ago decided that the first objects he met should not all appear to have been conjured from polished abstraction. Aristotle noticed the stool, touched it before sitting, then sat with the straight-backed caution of a man temporarily granting the body what the mind had not yet granted the world. A cup of water was offered. He studied the vessel before taking it. The material was clear, the surface without blemish, the shape too exact. He glanced at Eleni.
It is safe.
She said.
I assume
He replied.
that in a place such as this many things must be said to be safe.
He drank anyway. The silence behind the glass had become almost painful. The room had crossed beyond experiment and into encounter, and everyone on either side of the glass understood that nothing would ever again feel entirely hypothetical. Eleni remained in front of him, her manner neither softened into false reassurance nor sharpened into authority. She chose the plainest version of the truth they had agreed could still count as truth.
You are in a time far beyond your own.
She said.
We have brought you forth by reconstructing, with great accuracy, the world from which you came, including your life and thought, until you could continue from it as yourself.
He did not react at once. The scientists watching him had expected some visible shock at the word time, or else at the suggestion that his continued existence had not come through divine or natural means. Instead, what altered first in his face was concentration. He was not yet accepting the claim. He was sorting it.
At once,
He said after a moment.
I hear several assertions hidden inside one another.
Yes,
You say I am beyond my own time,
yes,
and by that you mean not merely absent from it, but placed after it.
yes.
He held her gaze.
Then before the rest, what is the measure of that afterward?
Eleni had expected disbelief first, or anger, or a demand for proof. The demand for measure came instead.
By the reckoning you would know.
She said.
Something near 600 Olympiads.
That reached him more deeply than any looser phrase about vastness could have done. His face did not open into theatrical shock. It grew still in calculation. She continued, more carefully now.
From the first Olympic victors down to your own lifetime is not yet 100 Olympiads. Take that whole span and lay it down almost 6 times. Then you begin to approach us.
For the first time since waking, he did not answer at once. His eyes moved, not toward the walls now, nor toward the hidden gallery, but slightly downward, as if the mind required a plainer surface on which to set so great a measure.
At such a distance,
He said at last,
a city may become dust, and the dust be built upon.
Yes,
Eleni said.
And those builders also pass.
yes,
He looked up again, but more slowly now.
So far that the names of fathers fail, so far that laws become commentary, so far that even ruin is old.
yes,
A silence followed, but not an empty one. It was the silence of a man forcing scale upon thought. Then he said, more quietly,
I asked whether I was in the future. That was too small a question.
Eleni waited.
This is not the tomorrow of my descendants.
He said,
It is another historical sky.
yes,
she said. He received that for another moment. Then, with a small motion of the hand, as if setting one proposition aside in order to expose the next, he said,
Good, then let us separate the rest. You say I have been brought forth.
yes,
You say this was done through a reconstruction.
yes,
And you say I continue as myself.
yes,
yes,
And you say I continue as myself.
yes,
Aristotle looked down briefly at his own hands.
They are not all the same claim.
no,
Eleni said. He lifted his eyes again.
Then separate them.
There were years of work behind the answer that followed, and it still felt crude in Eleni's mouth.
you died.
She said,
Long ago, by the measures of this age. Your life ended in your own age, but we possessed methods, mathematical, physical, historical, and computational, by which a world could be modeled in enough detail to recover not only events, but minds within those events. We did not summon a ghost. We did not imitate you by guesswork. We followed the structure of a real life until that life resumed.
He was silent. Then,
So I died,
Yes,
and now I live.
yes,
In a manner.
in a manner.
Eleni said. He looked at her for a long time. The room waited. At last he said,
Then the strangeness is obvious and not worth naming. The question is whether the thing is intelligible.
that was the first moment several of the philosophers behind the glass stopped merely observing and felt, with almost humiliating force, that the man before them was himself already reordering the situation more competently than the committees that had built it. Aristotle's gaze passed across the room again.
This place
He said,
is not built for my understanding.
No,
Eleni said,
not yet.
And the age beyond it.
Also no.
He nodded once.
Then the wise order would be, first distinguish, then teach.
Yes,
A physician was signaled forward to request permission for a brief medical assessment. Eleni translated. Aristotle listened, then turned his head toward the instruments with a coolness almost judicial.
These devices observe the body.
yes. And not only the body.
The physician glanced involuntarily at Eleni. Aristotle saw it.
Good.
He said,
Then I am not among fools.
the assessment was brief. He endured it with patience, though patience of a distinctly conditional kind. Every contact raised a question, every explanation produced another. When they checked the responsiveness of his eyes to light, he asked what generated the light. When they measured pulse, he asked how the instrument knew without touch. When they explained stabilization protocols, he asked stabilization from what? By the time the physician had withdrawn, the carefully staged scripts prepared for first contact were already obsolete. Aristotle rested the cup in both hands.
if this age possesses power enough to recover the dead,
He said.
why concern itself with me?
No one answered immediately. The question was not rhetorical and would not accept flattery. Eleni knew that.
Because you matter to the history of thought.
She said.
Because your work shaped later centuries. Because your errors shaped them too. Because you remain one of the minds through which the world still partly explains itself.
Still,
Yes,
That troubled him, visibly more than the chamber had.
my work survives.
in part.
In part,
He repeated.
which means also in distortion.
Yes,
His gaze lowered once more, though not in modesty. It was the look of a man who has just been informed that his responsibility did not end with his death, but continued without his supervision.
That
He said quietly.
is an untidy arrangement.
They moved him after that into the first adaptation room, and even the act of moving was full of compromise. The corridor itself had been hidden from him behind shifting panels, because the Institute had decided the full violence of modern architecture should not arrive all at once. Yet concealment had its own dishonesty. Aristotle noticed immediately that the route had been managed, that doors opened without visible hands, that surfaces responded to presence before contact. He said nothing, which Eleni had already learned did not mean the thing had escaped him. The adaptation chamber had been designed by a committee that mistrusted committees. It contained wood and stone and running water, living plants, soft light adjusted toward the warmer end of the visible spectrum, and proportions intended to prevent either confinement or overwhelm. No attempt had been made to imitate a Greek house, a temple, or the Lyceum. The designers had argued that false familiarity would only turn the first days into an insult. Better, they decided, to make a place that admitted newness while refusing gratuitous alienation. A table had been set with plain food: bread, olives, figs, cheese, water, and later, diluted wine once the medical staff approved it. Aristotle stood in the doorway a moment longer than the others liked.
This room
He said.
has been arranged to calm me.
yes,
Eleni said.
Then you expect me not to be calm.
we expected many things.
She said.
Most of them are already failing.
That almost satisfied him. He entered. Eleni had May Sato with her, one of the cognitive historians who had pressed hardest for teaching continuity before spectacle, and Hassan Akkoy, the same man who had watched from the gallery that morning, now admitted to the table because the revival chamber's script had already failed. He was not there to steer Aristotle toward comfort. He was there to hear whether the questions cut toward captivity. The physicians kept to the margins, visible when needed, unwilling to turn the room into a clinic. The next several hours revised the Institute's understanding more thoroughly than any simulation run had managed. Aristotle did not adapt as a frightened child. He did not adapt as a bewildered elder requiring simple reassurances. He did not adapt as a passive recipient of historical correction. He adapted as a theorist confronted with an impossible premise and determined, before all else, to prevent language from collapsing under it.
What do you mean by future, if the world from which I arise was itself reconstructed? What do you mean by accuracy? If I continue as myself, what is the principle of sameness? If my matter is altered, what have you preserved? If the dead may be recovered, by what justice do you choose among them? If many can be restored, why begin with one already so burdened by later interpretation? If this age has such powers, why does it speak so cautiously of them, out of wisdom, shame, or fear?
They had answers. His questions were better. May found herself abandoning prepared language within minutes and speaking more plainly than protocol recommended. Hassan stopped trying to shape answers in advance and listened instead for the moral structure of Aristotle's objections. The physicians, who had worried that philosophical strain might impede physical stabilization, were forced to accept that for this patient the opposite was true. Explanation did not agitate him. Vagueness did. At one point Eleni explained, as carefully as she could, that their civilization's ability to model the world depended on layers of mathematics, computation, and machine intelligence developed over centuries far beyond his own. Aristotle listened, then asked whether a structure built in such layers could still be audited the way a geometer audits a proof, or whether, past a certain depth, even its makers were forced to trust paths they could not rewalk in a single life. A pause.
In practice,
Hassan said.
often the second.
Aristotle turned toward him fully.
That
He said,
is not a small admission.
when they returned to the problem of reconstruction, what counted as the same life when matter had been guided, he pressed for how far the exactness of the reconstitution could be judged from within the life that continued, and for what disproportion between the living and the making might still be legible to him, not for reassurance. When Eleni spoke again of what had survived of his writing and what had wandered in transmission, he asked not whether later ages had admired him, but what work his name had been put to. When they described how much of their own power they withheld from him for fear of doing harm, he listened for the line where restraint became its own form of custody. He did not once ask whether he would be famous. He did ask whether he would be free. The question came quietly, almost as though he were testing whether the room deserved it.
You have made me,
He said to Eleni as evening drew closer.
or remade me, or recovered me. Your terms remain unstable. Tell me this at least plainly. Am I your possession?
The room seemed to narrow around the sentence.
No,
Eleni said,
Not your instrument.
no,
Not your proof.
no.
He studied her.
You answer quickly.
We agreed on that before you ever woke.
That does not mean you agree now.
No,
She said,
it means we bound ourselves because we did not trust ourselves not to become worse when the impossible stood in front of us.
for the first time that day, Aristotle seemed not merely attentive, but moved. Not comforted, not reassured, but altered by the fact that these strangers, whose powers exceeded any political imagination of his own age, had at least understood the temptation to turn him into an object.
At least,
He said softly.
you know the danger.
By nightfall, the body had begun to insist on limits the intellect would not willingly have granted. Aristotle's questions remained sharp, but fatigue had entered them. His shoulders had lowered almost imperceptibly. Twice his gaze held on some point in the room, not because he had found a new problem there, but because he needed a moment before language resumed. Eleni noticed. So did the physician. Between them, they ended the session before he would have consented to end it himself. They led him to the guest quarters prepared for the first nights. The room was simple by contemporary standards and nearly incomprehensible by his. Plain walls, a narrow bed, a chair, storage, water, garments, a washroom concealed behind a sliding panel. Lighting he could alter without flame. No reflective surface had been placed directly in the room. That had been a deliberate choice. The team had judged that modern precision of self-image should not arrive on the first night like an accusation. The physician explained the door first. It could be locked from within. No one would enter without announcement. The room systems could be called by touch if he required anything, though Eleni quickly added that the touch surface need not be used tonight unless necessary. Aristotle listened to all of this with grave attention. He touched the fabric of the garments laid out for him. He examined the bed frame. He opened the washroom panel and stood still long enough at the threshold that Eleni wondered whether the fixtures within, clean lines, invisible plumbing, a basin that produced water at command, had finally surpassed the day's allotment of strangeness. But when he turned back, he asked only,
Do people in this age trust too much to hidden systems?
Eleni gave a tired half-smile.
Yes,
She said.
often.
He nodded, as though this, at least, had restored a degree of proportion to the universe. At the doorway, Eleni stopped.
We will continue tomorrow.
She said.
Yes,
Aristotle answered. But he did not sound as though tomorrow belonged to a sequence already underway. He sounded as though tomorrow was another problem whose terms had not yet been set. For a moment, neither moved. Then he asked, not looking at her, but at the darkened pane of the window, where only a dim suggestion of his own outline was visible against the night beyond.
Does the place from which I came exist anywhere now except in record?
Eleni did not answer too fast.
No,
She said.
not as a living world.
He stood with that. The grief in him had not yet found a single object. It was too large and too distributed for that. It belonged at once to persons long dead, to cities ground into history, to vanished habits of speech, to the extinction of every ordinary assumption under which a life is lived without needing to justify itself. Yet the grief was still partially unreal even to him, because the day had not allowed stillness enough for it to become specific. At last he inclined his head.
Then tomorrow,
He said,
you will begin not only to teach me your world, but to teach me the scale of my loss.
Eleni wanted to answer gently. She wanted to deny the cruelty of it, or at least postpone it. But he had already shown that gentleness at the cost of truth would insult him.
Yes,
She said. When she left, he remained standing in the same place for some time. He did not pray. He did not call out. He did not test the room like a prisoner measuring confinement. He moved slowly through it once, touching what required touch, observing what required observation. Then he sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress received him with a depth, and yielding no cot or pallet of the world he had lost had offered, soft almost to the point of excess, as though this age cushioned sleep itself instead of merely taking rest where fatigue permitted. For a breath he could not decide whether the sensation was kindness or another kind of estrangement. He leaned forward with his hands clasped, and allowed at last a weariness that had been held off all day by argument and form. Sleep came late. When it did not come as peace. It came as the body's demand that questioning pause, even where the soul had no wish to release it. The first night in the future did not reconcile him to anything. It merely placed an interval between astonishment and the greater labor to come. And beyond the walls, in a civilization that had brought back a dead philosopher and was already beginning to fear what it had done, the instruments continued their quiet work. Chapter 2: The Stabilization of Aristotle. The next morning they brought him into a circular room lit through smart glass adjusted to his comfort. On one wall hung an image of Earth seen from orbit. He regarded it for a long time, uncertain whether it was painting, instrument, or divine mockery. He had not asked what made the image possible. Not because the question was unimportant, but because he had learned that, in this age, every answer opened 10 more. When Dr. Eleni entered the room, she was accompanied by 4 others: a physician, a linguist, a cognitive historian, and an ethics liaison. Not a crowd. A new world should not arrive as one.
we have thought carefully.
Eleni told him.
We will not cast you into this age all at once. We will proceed according to an order.
The faintest trace of amusement crossed his face.
Very good.
He said.
Even in this age, order is still useful.
It was not trust, not yet. But it was the first form trust might take between them, an agreement that the impossible would not excuse carelessness. The plan, when they finally put it before him, was less like a curriculum than an ethical treaty. Eleni took the first part.
The first aim is not to persuade you of every extraordinary thing. The first aim is to allow you to live without fear.
He accepted that.
The second aim is to give you language. We have revived your Greek, but the world no longer speaks it as its common tongue. You must learn at least one living language for independence.
What language governs this place?
No single one governs the whole world, but here several are common. We propose modern Greek first, then English.
Aristotle frowned.
You still call it Greek.
Yes,
That seemed to please him. The third aim, said the physician, is bodily and sensory adaptation. Your first days will involve controlled exposure. Light, sound, moving images, transport, crowds, artificial systems. The modern world is saturated with stimuli unknown in your time. We must prevent overload. Aristotle looked around the room again.
So even now man has made for himself an environment excessive for man.
No one answered immediately, which he correctly interpreted as confirmation. The ethics liaison, Hassan Akoy, continued.
The fourth aim is conceptual orientation. We will explain the principal discoveries of natural philosophy as it developed after your era: astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, evolution, medicine, political history, computation, and machine intelligence.
Aristotle leaned forward at the word astronomy.
The stars, then, you know them better.
Yes,
Hassan said gently.
much better.
And the earth,
Yes,
and life.
yes.
Aristotle sat back, half delighted, half wary.
Then I shall have to be corrected in public by the dead future.
Eleni smiled.
In private first.
Eleni continued.
The sixth aim is moral and political adaptation. You will encounter institutions and customs unlike your own, especially concerning slavery, women, citizenship, religion, personhood, and equality. Some of your views will be admired, others will be rejected strongly.
He turned back to her, fully alert now.
As they should be if they are false.
This answer startled some of them, though later they would realize it was perfectly Aristotelian. He did not say he would surrender his judgments. He said only that truth, not piety toward ancestry, was the standard.
The seventh aim
Said Eleni.
is choice. Once you understand enough, you will decide how you wish to live. You will not be displayed as a curiosity. You may teach, study, write, remain private, meet the public, or refuse all of these.
At this, for the first time, Aristotle seemed deeply moved.
Refuse.
Yes,
You would spend such effort and then permit me obscurity.
yes,
He considered that carefully.
Then you are not merely collectors of marvels.
Hassan answered.
We are trying not to be.
That afternoon began the first true lessons. They did not start with machines, they started with maps. A great table surface lit up beneath a thin sheet of clear material. When May touched it, the Mediterranean appeared first as color and outline, then with increasing precision. Coastlines sharpened, islands settled into place, names emerged: Athens, Stagira, Lesbos, Macedon, Egypt. Aristotle placed his hand above the table, but did not touch it.
It moves without wax or pigment.
Yes,
It may be altered.
yes.
Said May.
But first let it remain what you know.
He bent closer.
Stagira,
He said quietly. His gaze moved.
Lesbos, Macedon, Egypt.
He paused over Attica.
Athens.
The word was not spoken as information, but as recognition.
You know the coasts very exactly.
He said.
More exactly than your age could measure them.
May replied.
Yes,
He murmured.
I believe that.
She touched the table again, and the map widened and narrowed at her hand without losing proportion. Aristotle drew back a little.
So one may command nearness and distance alike.
Yes,
Show me again.
She did. He watched the sea enlarge, then contract, the names holding fast to their places.
A map that obeys inquiry.
He said. Hassan smiled faintly.
That is one way to describe it.
May rested her fingers at the edge of the surface.
now we will change not the scale,
She said.
but the time.
The years began to move. At first the changes were close enough to thought. Macedon expanded. Alexander's inheritance fractured. Rome spread slowly, then with appetite. Aristotle's expression tightened, but he said nothing.
Could you slow it?
He asked. May slowed the display. He watched kingdoms and provinces appear and vanish, names replaced by others, borders flowing and breaking like lines drawn on water. Byzantium endured. Caliphates expanded. Kingdoms divided and reformed.
Again.
He said. She ran it once more. This time his eyes followed the movement of roads, ports, and sea routes.
The world has been arguing over the same ground for a very long time.
He said.
Yes,
Said Hassan.
though the arguments grew larger.
May opened the map farther west and south. The sea broadened beyond the familiar frame. Africa lengthened. Roots bent around it. Oceans filled with lines. Aristotle frowned.
Men sailed around Libya.
Yes.
May said. He absorbed that in silence. Then lands unknown to him entered the world picture. He looked from one side of the table to the other, as if suspecting an error in the geometry.
What are these?
Continents your age did not know.
Said Hassan.
Empty.
No,
Aristotle turned toward him. Hassan held his gaze.
not empty, full of peoples, kingdoms, languages, and histories.
May touched the Western Ocean. Roots leapt across it. Islands appeared first, then coasts, then vast inland shapes that no Greek map had ever imagined. Ports flared into being on both sides of the water. Fleets moved. Trade lines multiplied.
Who reached them first?
Aristotle asked.
Sailors under the crowns of Portugal and Spain.
Said Hassan.
Then others followed, trade became conquest, conquest became empire.
On the map, territories spread across oceans and linked distant continents under the same banners. Aristotle watched the lines harden.
Then discovery was not merely knowledge.
He said.
It was appetite armed with geography.
No one answered immediately. Colonization followed. Then industrialization, wars, nation-states, and a planet-spanning mesh of routes and borders passed in grave succession across the surface. Aristotle did not speak. Finally, the globe itself rose from the table, turning slowly in the air as a projected sphere. Aristotle stood.
So,
He whispered.
the inhabited world was never the world.
No.
Said May. He circled the globe once, as if examining an animal.
And men crossed all of it,
Yes.
and rule all of it.
A pause.
Not quite.
Hassan said.
We affect all of it, rule is another matter.
Aristotle nodded grimly.
More honest.
Among the more difficult moments of the first week was the mirror. The body they had restored to him had been recovered from the past itself, not assembled by guesswork, close enough to be him. Still, he had not yet seen himself clearly. Ancient mirrors were polished metal, dim and interpretive. Modern reflective surfaces were cruelly exact. When he finally stood before one, alone except for a discreet observer through the wall, he looked for a very long time. His hand touched his own face, beard, eyelids. Then he said, not to anyone visible.
The form remembers itself poorly.
That line circulated among the staff for months. By the third day, he had accepted, provisionally, 3 things: that he was not dreaming, that these people were not deliberately mocking him, and that the age into which he had awakened was not simply more powerful, but structured by kinds of knowledge he had never conceived. His resistance remained strongest around the notion of the simulation. One evening, seated with Eleni beside a garden wall that produced warmth without fire, he returned to it.
You say I arise from a reconstruction.
Yes.
If another were made, equally exact, would he also be Aristotle?
That is one of our unresolved questions.
He almost smiled.
Then your age, too, has places where its feet do not reach the ground.
Yes.
That is comforting,
Why?
because a world in which all questions are closed is a world in which philosophy has died. And if philosophy has died, your miracles are poverty.
The remark stayed with them. The practical plan for his first month was revised around his temperament. He would not receive passive lectures for hours. Instead, each day was divided into 4 parts. Morning, language immersion. They began with slowly spoken modern Greek, then moved to written forms, then to recorded speech and adaptive study systems he could revisit at will. He adapted astonishingly fast, especially once he grasped the systematic sound changes and shifts in syntax. He took pleasure in identifying what had decayed, what had survived, and what usage had made newly elegant. Midday, natural philosophy of the modern kind. They began with astronomy because it would shatter the old cosmos decisively and productively. The Earth as planet, the Sun as star, Other stars as suns, galaxies, deep time, evolution. He objected often, but his objections were intelligent, not defensive. Once evidence was laid before him in sequence, he yielded points with visible discipline. Afternoon, technological acclimatization. They began with the simplest things: electric light, recorded sound, screens, and basic personal interfaces. Only later came translation systems, AI-mediated systems, medical scanning, and general simulation environments. The first time he heard a human voice reproduced from a device after the speaker had left the room, he stood up so quickly that 2 security staff tensed. Then he realized what had happened and said only,
So memory has been externalized.
"Evening conversation. No curriculum. Ethics, politics, poetry, grief, comedy, God, mathematics, appetite, boredom, friendship." Here he came alive most fully. The scientists discovered that what helped him adapt was not bombardment with facts, but entry into living argument. They were also careful about what not to do. No media exposure. No public announcement. No immediate confrontation with the worst horrors of subsequent history. No unrestricted network access. No recordings released without consent. No sensationalism. The civilization that revived Aristotle had not done so unanimously. There had been protests for years. Some called it desecration. Some called it slavery of the dead. Some called it a rich society's vanity project. Some called it the beginning of historical justice. So one entire branch of the plan concerned not his education, but his rights. On the 5th day, Hassan explained this.
In our world,
He said,
a being capable of reason, self-direction, suffering, preference, and speech is owed moral standing regardless of origin.
Aristotle looked at him keenly.
Regardless of origin.
Yes,
So if I am simulated, I am nonetheless a person.
yes,
Not property.
not property,
Not an instrument.
not an instrument.
Aristotle sat with that. More than any machine, more than any astronomical image, this seemed to disturb him.
At last,
He said softly.
you begin from the conclusion rather than arrive at it.
Hassan laughed despite himself.
Sometimes only on paper.
During the first week, they also introduced him to beauty, knowing that survival is not adaptation. He heard Bach before he understood the concept of the orchestra. He saw satellite images of storm systems over oceans. He watched a seed germinate in time-lapse. He learned that tragedies, comedies, and epics had continued to be written for millennia after him. He was shown a modern library and became, for the first and only time, speechless. Not because of the architecture, because of the number of books.
Have all these been read?
He asked,
Not by any one person.
Then your age also knows the pain of insufficiency.
Very much so.
Good.
he said.
Then I am among colleagues.
By the end of the 7th day, the core team met without him to assess the situation. Cognitively stable, said the physician. Exceptional adaptation rate, said the linguist. Emotionally guarded, but not dissociated, said the psychologist.
Philosophically dangerous.
Said Hassan. They looked at him.
In what sense?
In the best sense.
Hassan said,
Give him 3 months and he will begin reorganizing our categories out loud.
Eleni stood by the glass wall, overlooking the enclosed olive garden they had planted for him. Aristotle was outside, watching a horticultural drone move between the trees with grave attention, burning weeds in thin, controlled lines between the roots. He had already understood that it was not conscious. What held him was the difference between guided procedure and judgment.
What is the long plan?
May asked. Eleni answered without turning.
The same as it would be for anyone displaced beyond comprehension. Give him ground under his feet. Give him language. Give him causes where possible, patience where not. Let him grieve his world. Let him encounter ours gradually. Then see whether he wishes merely to understand it or to help judge it.
And after that,
Eleni watched as Aristotle paused, frowned at the drone's exact, unvarying movement, and began explaining aloud that even fire, rightly used, required judgment.
After that,
She said,
the future will have to endure being examined by Aristotle.
that evening, as the room dimmed to something closer to firelight, Aristotle asked for wax tablets. They gave him instead a stylus and a writing surface that could mimic parchment, ink, chalk, or wax. He chose wax. At the top he inscribed, in careful Greek, concerning the world after man's first world, and whether its powers exceed its wisdom. Then he paused and added a second line. These are preliminary notes. When Eleni saw it, she smiled. He had arrived, not because he understood the new world, but because he had begun to investigate it. And that, more than all their technology, was what made the project viable. Because the true plan was never merely to teach Aristotle the future. It was to survive the conversation that would follow.